Hello, I'm Alex from BC Designer. In this video, we'll talk about scenarios as one of the tools of strategic planning. We'll discuss different types of scenarios and the way scenarios help formulate strategic hypotheses. Let's start with the general question. What is scenario planning? BC Designer team is working on the software for strategic planning. So our definition is biased towards the strategic planning domain. Here you have it. Scenario planning is a disciplined way to formulate strategic hypotheses in the context of existing driving forces and their uncertainties. What does it mean in practice? How do we formulate scenarios and how do we convert them into strategic hypotheses? This diagram explains how to use scenarios in strategic planning. It is divided into three steps. Step 1, analysis and decomposition of the driving forces. Step 2, formulation of the scenarios. Step 3, formulation of the response plans. The ultimate element of the diagram is increase business resilience, the ability of the organization to better adapt to the ever-changing environment. That's what we want to achieve with scenario planning. Let's discuss how to use this diagram in practice. In the first step, we need to break down driving forces into uncertainties. What are those driving forces? How do we find ones relevant to our organization? A good starting point is to conduct the analysis of external factors using the PESTEL framework and analyze the competitive landscape using the five forces framework. We discussed both tools in separate articles. Now, I'd like to focus on the practical use of the PESTEL framework for scenario planning. On this diagram, you see an example of PESTEL analysis with its findings across perspectives that form the PESTEL acronym: political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal. To illustrate the steps of scenario planning, let's use these driving forces: climate change, cybersecurity threats, remote work. The templates for PESTEL and five forces are available in BC Designer software, so you can sign up with a free plan and use them as a starting point for the analysis of the driving forces. Let's get back to the driving forces that we have chosen for this video. Here we have them on the scenario planning diagram. What exactly do these driving forces mean for your organization? We need to break down global driving forces into more tangible uncertainties. For example, climate change will have a massive effect on our lives. In the context of strategic planning, we need to focus on a few most important uncertainties. For example, extreme weather. There are many threats related to cybersecurity. To narrow down the problem area, we'll focus on the scenarios related to ransomware attacks and data protection. In a similar way, we break down the remote work driving force into more specific factors or uncertainties. In the next step, we need to formulate scenarios on a high level of abstraction and understand the type of scenarios that we are dealing with. Scenarios work better when formulated as a story. Behind a scenario title, ransomware attack on our cloud infrastructure, there should be a story. One day, customers start sending you reports about problems with the servers. You're on the phone with IT specialists, but it looks like they don't have access to some critical systems. With stories, we can achieve a high engagement from stakeholders of scenario planning. Another goal is to decide the type of scenario. In the context of strategic planning, we define scenarios related to business continuity or the possibility of your organization delivering critical service. High priority scenarios that can be aligned with existing strategy, and scenarios for monitoring, scenarios that are potentially important but are not resonating with an existing strategy yet. Let's see what we can do about different types of scenarios. Business continuity scenarios form a part of disaster recovery or business continuity planning. In our example, business continuity scenarios are heat waves derived from extreme weather uncertainty and ransomware attack that corresponds to cybersecurity threats. Traditionally, these scenarios are covered by disaster recovery planning. Let's look at business continuity scenarios from the viewpoint of strategic planning. Compared to other types of scenarios, business continuity scenarios involve fewer uncertainties. We're not sure when a certain event will happen, but we know what it is about and how to minimize the potential damage. We can also simulate the occurrence of the event via wargaming and estimate the readiness of the organization by analyzing the gap between expected performance and real performance. The readiness indicator and the results of the gap analysis give us a clue to formulating a better prevention strategy. In practice, it means that we can formulate a risk mitigation initiative. Here I have one for ransomware attacks. It is quantified by a success factor indicator that helps minimize the risk of ransomware attacks. In this case, the indicator is complexity of IT infrastructure. It's configured for minimization, as less complex infrastructure is easier to protect. With this initiative, we can also align additional documents, such as business continuity and recovery plans. When ready for practical implementation, we can add additional details such as budget, timeline, and owner. In the description for the video, I will share the link to the article about cybersecurity, where we discuss the ways to estimate the readiness of the organization for cybersecurity threats, as well as success factors for more effective mitigation of cybersecurity risks. Another type of scenario is high priority scenario. These scenarios resonate with existing strategy and are strategic hypotheses that we can start working on right now. The occurrence of the ransomware attack that we discussed before is covered by the business continuity scenario. But the prevention initiatives for such attack sounds more like a high priority scenarios that we can start working on before the actual crisis hits. For example, in the context of uncertainties related to ransomware attacks and new data protection legislation, the organization might start working on their comprehensive cybersecurity strategy, build a risk model and quantify existing risks, analyze leading factors, form incident response team, and so on. In this case, we can make scenarios more tangible by quantifying the way the scenario impacts the ultimate business performance. For example, in the cybersecurity domain, we can quantify the cost of data breaches or quantify existing risk level with a weighted risk index. In a separate video, we discussed some practical examples applicable to cybersecurity. Finally, the third type of scenario is scenarios for monitoring. These scenarios are not specific enough to be aligned with existing goals as a hypothesis, and they are not looking like something that might affect critical business operations, so they are not business continuity scenarios. Still, they might affect our organization in the future, and we are interested in monitoring them. It's a good idea to discuss such scenarios with your team and come up with a possible response plan. One of the driving forces on the diagram was remote work. Remote work is here to stay. During the pandemic, many countries updated their legislation to support remote work. But in those cases, the focus was on domestic remote work. Cross border remote work is still a significant uncertainty. It is a good idea to discuss questions that involve this uncertainty. What is our dependency on remote work? How would we ensure legal compliance in case new legislation is released? Uh, how are we going to ensure compliance from the viewpoint of cybersecurity and data privacy? The answers to these questions will form the possible response plan. In terms of quantification, it's too early to talk about readiness indicators like we did in the case of business continuity scenarios. We don't have enough detail to give a good estimation of potential impact like we did for high priority scenarios. What we can do is find an early sign indicator, an indicator that would warn us about the increasing possibility of the scenario. Here we have an example of such indicator, the number of keyword-specific news on the topic. Typically, the new legislation is widely announced and discussed in the press. We can monitor the number of publications with certain keywords. A simple Google search in the news section will give us a required estimation. If you are using BC Designer to automate your strategy scorecard, it will help to visualize the trend and capture interesting findings as comments or initiatives for the indicator. The ultimate element of the scenario planning diagram is increase business resilience. Have we improved business resilience by practicing scenario planning? A reasonable assumption is that having a diverse picture of existing driving forces and investing time in discussing scenarios increases the organization's readiness for future challenges. Scenario planning is not something that gives immediate results. There is a saying that the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago, and the second best time is now. The same can be said about scenarios planning. The best time to start it was a few years ago. The second best time is now. What are the steps to start using scenarios for strategic planning? How can BC Designer software help? Sign up with a free plan at BC Designer to access the PESTEL template that we used in the beginning of this video. Use the Initiatives tool in BC Designer to describe scenarios and align them with driving forces and business goals. Align indicators with scenarios. Track them over time. Make notes. Visualize data on the dashboards and report to the stakeholders. In the description for this video, you will find the link to the article about scenario planning where we discuss the topic in more detail. As always, our team will be happy to assist you with your challenges. Thank you for your time.